Good morning to you. I hope you're all well and happy. Well, this is The Chemist's Son. Again, written about 2015, so we're slowly getting through them. Again, I'm reading from my little iPad, so please excuse me. I don't have the technology or the money to actually get a teleprompter, so here we go. This story follows Martine Patterson, a journalist who discovers a mysterious, self-published memoir in a second-hand bookstore, detailing an impossible account of time travel. The journal's author, John, describes growing up in a London pharmacy in 1963, where he and his twin sister Jane discovers a subterranean passage linked to an ancient Roman rituals and 18th century occultism. This portal transports them back to 1863, a very grim area where they encounter the villainous Whitmarsh family, who operate a brutal child trafficking ring. The experience results in a permanent, debilitating brain injury for Jane, leaving John to care for her in the modern day, while struggling to convince publishers of his story's historical authenticity. Through his writing, John attempts to reconcile the squalid violence of the past with his family's tragic legacy. Ultimately, Patterson's investigation into the pharmacy, because she has found the book in the 1990s, confirms the existence of the residents described, leaving her to wonder if the account is a genuine supernatural occurrence or simply the product of John's fractured psychopathic mind. And it will be up to you to decide which is which. Love this book. Of course, it's all set in the streets around St. Paul's Cathedral again, mostly in 1960 and the 1860s. So, of course, I enjoyed writing it. The Chemist's Son. Love it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources, articles, research, personal notes, and distill the most important, often unbelievable, nuggets of knowledge or insight specifically for you.
Today, we are attempting an extraction of truth. So difficult, it really borders on metaphysics. Our sources aren't police reports or academic papers.
No.
Our central artifact is a single, privately bound, gold-lettered journal titled, pretty chillingly, The Chemist's Son.
And what a finding this was. I mean, this journal only surfaced in 2006. A journalist, Martine Patterson, just spotted it tucked away in a dusty bookstall in Clerkenwell.
Just by chance.
Total chance. She paid, what, less than £10 for it? And she noted immediately the handsome dark leather, the gold lettering, and that incredibly specific format.
The dot matrix printing.
The old-fashioned dot matrix printing. It just screams deeply personal, you know? Meticulously cataloged and highly disciplined.
And that brings us to the central, deeply provocative question that has to frame every single detail we discuss today. Is the author John Mills a high-functioning psychopath with a genius for meticulous fabrication? Or is he telling the absolutely true story of time travel, of ancient ritualistic murder, Victorian-era child abduction, and a lifetime of devotion to his shattered twin sister?
Because the evidence we have is it's fundamentally antagonistic. On one side, you've got John's memoir, which is this edifice of staggering, intricate detail.
Right.
It goes from his adult life in 1985 all the way back to his childhood trauma in 1963, and then catastrophically back another 100 years to 1863.
And he even had these footnotes referencing AD 54 and 1749. I mean, the scope is just immense.
It's unbelievable.
But then on the other side, you have Martine Patterson's rigorous 2006 investigation. She tried to verify everything, the physical locations, the businesses, the people John describes.
Yeah.
And her results led to these massive, completely unresolved physical contradictions that make John's written reality, well, quite literally impossible to ground in the present day.
So this deep dive, it's really more than just a historical true crime or some forgotten sci-fi story.
Oh, much more. It's an immersive examination of perspective, of memory, and how we, the observers, interpret evidence when a man's entire sanity and the tragic state of his twin sister Jane rest completely on accepting the impossible is real.
It forces us to balance what the intellectual firepower you'd need for a genius-level lie against the sheer emotional terror of an inexplicable reality.
Exactly. So let's unpack the life John lived in the shadow of this event.
Okay, let's start where John Mills chose to begin his memoir. That's in 1985, so 2 decades after the big event in 1963. This is where he really establishes the burden he carries.
Yeah, the emotional cost of his entire existence. By 1985, John is living this quiet life in North London, and his whole world revolves around caring for his twin, Jane.
Jane, who suffered severe permanent brain damage during what he calls the catastrophe.
She's mute, she lacks most of her higher functions, and she needs a private carer every single morning just for basic functions.
But John describes this commitment not as a sacrifice. It's more like his destiny, right?
His destiny, exactly. He explains that he had to call off his own marriage a few years before, after their father died, because the thought of putting Jane in a care home was it was unbearable to him.
He talks about the mysterious bond that has been known to connect twins, almost as a way to justify this huge disruption to his life.
And what's fascinating about his writing is that he doesn't lean on sentimentality. He immediately dismisses any idea of, sensational telepathy or anything like that.
Right.
He says their bond was subtler. It was just knowing that each was part of the world. And he offers this really profound analogy.
The one about breathing.
Yeah. Having Jane as my twin was like breathing. One does not notice it, but if our lungs stop, then our attention is drawn to it.
That paints such a beautiful picture of quiet devotion, but it contrasts so sharply with the gritty financial reality he's living.
Completely. His income is from 2 sources. Renting out the downstairs pharmacy shop, which, by this point, is run by a couple named Alan and Hazel Landed. This is the weird part. The museum. He charges school groups and history buffs to visit what he calls the mid-19th century dental surgery at the back of the building.
And he claims this back room is an original, perfectly preserved piece of history. A dental surgery just frozen as it was in 1863.
Which is a critical detail, isn't it? Because it implies he's actively monetizing the physical space that's connected to his trauma.
Whether it's real or fabricated, he's basically running a museum to his own nightmare.
But then John's own account immediately starts to raise these serious questions about his own sanity and the health of his family long before any time travel.
He talks about his crippling weekly migraines, still has them in 1985.
And he blames these mental ailments and Jane's earlier problems on their parentage. He says they had their genesis in their shared parentage, implying this history of inherited psychological fragility.
And it all got worse after their mother's death, which he never really specifies how that happened.
Here's a detail that really jumped out at me because it establishes this baseline of desperation and illegality within the family. His medication.
The ibuprofen.
The ibuprofen. He's relying on it, but it was only patented in America 2 years prior. It wouldn't be legally available in the UK for another 6 years.
But how is he getting it?
His father, William Mills, the pharmacist, had to illegally smuggle in monthly supplies of this advanced American drug just to manage John's distress.
Wow. So before any of the crazy stuff happens, the father is already willing to break the law, and not just any law, but strict laws about controlled substances because of how intense John's suffering was.
Exactly. It establishes a family pattern of secrecy, of covering things up for the sake of survival.
And this intellectual, almost clinical focus John has, he uses this incredibly specific 19th century terminology to describe Jane's behavior before 1963.
Yeah, he says his father observed her traits and he names them. Arithmomania, the compulsive counting, mysophobia, the obsessive fear of contamination.
And délire de toucher, the compulsion to touch things.
And you have to ask yourself, why does a supposedly normal 13-year-old boy in 1963 use such precise, academic, almost antique psychological vocabulary?
It feeds right into that genius psychopath argument, doesn't it?
It really does. It suggests he had this highly intellectual, almost obsessive focus on psychiatric conditions, like he was studying them intensely to categorize his sister.
The person who wrote this memoir is clearly capable of deep analysis, whether he's analyzing his sister or historical records. And that intellectual rigor is the very core of this whole mystery.
So that's the portrait John gives us of himself in 1985. Devoted, brilliant, psychologically fragile, using smuggled drugs, and meticulously documenting his sister's flaws.
And that's the man whose journal Martine Patterson finds in 2006.
Right. And Martine, she's a nonfiction journalist, and she admitted that after just devouring this journal in one sitting, she said, "I honestly did not know what to make of it." She was completely stumped.
Her first assessment is so telling because it just perfectly encapsulates the conflict here.
She saw the journal as an unparalleled illustration of how disciplined and imaginative a deranged mind could be. She suspected it was nonsense, but she couldn't dismiss the sheer level of organized detail.
And John, writing back in 1985, he completely anticipated that reaction. He says he already got rejections. He expected publishers to be afraid to touch the story of a man who says he traveled into the past.
He acknowledges it right up front. There is a total absence of any physical proof, which leads him to the major credibility problem.
The missing collaborators.
The missing collaborators. He writes that all the souls connected to his experience are dead or missing. And here I glance at Jane in a state of purgatory. He names 3 key women who could back up his story: Professor Nisha Wade, Alice, and Ida Bell.
And he even applies that same meticulous, calculating mind to them. He figures out Ida Bell would be 36 in 1985, since she went back to Sweden. But when he tries to calculate Alice's age...
Who's 23 in 1863.
Right, he notes the physical impossibility if she'd somehow survived to the 1980s. He writes, imagine that, a 143-year-old woman walking abroad in London.
And then he dismisses his own idea as just plain stupid. And the logical dissonance there is amazing. He can accept time travel, but he rejects extreme longevity.
It's like he has a specific rational structure around the irrational events he describes. He can't handle a 143-year-old woman, but he needs us to believe in the tunnel.
This whole section just sets the tension perfectly. A highly intellectual man claiming selfless devotion, facing constant mental illness, armed with illegal drugs, writing an impossible story, and all his witnesses are gone or silent.
Which means we have to turn to the moment his entire life fractured. August 1963.
Okay, let's move to the genesis of the event, August 1963. John spends a lot of time detailing his father's acute distress, really setting the stage for chaos born from desperation.
The setting is Carter Lane, EC4, right in the heart of London. John's father, William Mills, is a man of humble birth from East London, and he is just deeply, visibly depressed.
And John meticulously lists why. The quarterly financial statements are bad, the summer weather has been unusually wet, so there are no tourists.
Shoplifting is up, and he's worried about drug addicts starting to come into the area.
And William Mills is just consumed by this. The 10-year mortgage left on the shop, the threat of modernization. He knows computerization and big chains will kill off the small, independent chemist shop.
He even questions if John, his intelligent and overqualified son, should be chained to this dying business for the rest of his life.
So John and Jane are home from boarding school for the summer, doing their weekend duties. John helps with prescriptions. Jane does the accounts because she's slightly better with figures.
And their father is just desperately hoping John will take over and continue the legacy that's basically crushing his soul.
Then the trigger event happens. It's sudden. It's shocking, almost. Theatrical. While the father is busy measuring out potassium permanganate for this old gonorrhea cure.
An antique recipe for an old customer, which is great detail.
It is. There's a loud metallic bang sounding like percussion. This isn't just a leak. It sounds like something breaking through physical matter.
And then the splash of water. A main water pipe has broken and flooded the cellar.
The immediate solution is temporary. Workmen come, they pump out the water, but they leave behind hundreds of gallons of dark, polluted water and 2 feet of wet soil and rubble.
And they promise to clear it in a month, which just adds to William Mills' stress.
And here comes the classic catalyst for all childhood mischief and horror stories.
Right.
Boredom.
Right.
John and Jane, they're fed up with their summer duties, the gloom, the mess. They venture into the damp, newly deepened cellar, They notice a new layer of strange clay, and Jane, with her eye for detail, spots an unusual fashioned lump of rock sticking out.
So they start digging. For an hour, they excavate and they uncover the top of an archway. And behind it, a black, burnt wooden door with no handle and no lock.
They use a crowbar from their father's toolbox, a simple practical tool to splinter it open. And this is where the world splits.
The descent John describes is so visceral, he really emphasizes the physical reality of it.
He does. A narrow claustrophobic entrance, stone steps leading down, then a long passageway cut into solid bedrock, ending in another set of steps.
And the smell. The smell was unknown and disgusting, he says. Something ancient and foul.
They turn back for a moment, but John, again, with that obsessive attention to detail, notices a thin break in the stonework. A door made of small bricks covered in some soft, creamy material.
They smash through that only to find another red brick wall.
And the question of why they kept all this a secret is immediately addressed. It grounds their actions in their 1963 reality.
They were scared of telling their dad, their financially strained, depressed father. They thought if he found out, he'd just sell the business even faster or send them away to that hated uncle in Kennington.
So they hide the large book they eventually find in the most unlikely place. Jane's sock and knicker drawer.
A few days later, John enlarges the hole in that second wall. They peer into this tiny 10 by 10 foot room and see the most ghastly and frightful thing.
A dusty, hoary creature. A corpse sitting upright at a desk, eyes eaten away, skeletal fingers covered in rings.
And a second body, a full skeleton, just lying on the floor. John estimates the sitting woman had been there for centuries, maybe bricked up alive as a punishment.
And on the desk, there's this large, disturbing book. It's written in Latin, French, and this indecipherable Old English with arcane symbols.
They can't read it, they're terrified, they retreat, and then, almost as if summoned by fate, or maybe by John's subconscious need for someone to believe him, Professor Nisha Wade appears.
Enter Professor Nisha Wade, a history professor. They meet her 2 days later at the British Museum, and John is immediately suspicious of the timing.
He describes her as tall, mixed race, with a London accent, but he also says she's a woman of secrecy.
And he notes she was strangely knowledgeable. She pretends not to know her way around their house when they invite her back, and she doesn't seem surprised at all by their horrifying story of corpses in secret tunnels.
If John is making this all up, Professor Wade is the perfect invention. She's a super competent historian who comes in and validates the impossible.
And she is immediately useful. She takes one look at the book, scans the pages, and quickly identifies it as mid-18th century. And she identifies the core occult concept, the Rite of Gonith.
Which is what, exactly?
A powerful spirit entity that lived in two worlds and required a specific possession and offering before it would manifest a pathway through time.
So it's a time travel ritual.
A time travel ritual meant to extend life. But she immediately dismisses that possibility, looking at the bodies they found. She concludes, so much for magic extending their lives.
So she establishes the historical truth behind the chamber, which provides John with the entire context for what happens next.
This analysis immediately throws us into Section 3, where John Mills provides this truly staggering, almost academic level of historical and occult context to validate the corpses he found under his house.
The level of detail here is just extraordinary. This is the crucial evidence John uses to argue for his sanity, and you have to ask whether a 13-year-old boy in 1963, even a really smart one, could possibly synthesize all this without some kind of historical help.
He links the skeleton on the floor to a Roman priest named Fundanus, a priest of Jupiter in Londinium, who vanished from all records in AD 54.
And Fundanus, he says, practiced this rite of Gonith.
Right. Fundanus, fearing death so far from Rome, was trying to get immortality. The ritual required creating a path, the corridor, and traveling back in time to seize a victim.
Specifically a baby or infant for the maximum life force.
It's horrific. The priest had to consume the blood and flesh of the victim in that enclosed, consecrated space until he was consumed by the ritual itself. John suggests Fundanus died during this cannibalistic act.
Which is why only a skeleton remained. Okay, so what about the sitting corpse?
He links the sitting, mummified corpse to a Rachel O'Toole from 1749. She was the daughter of Jane O'Toole.
And Jane O'Toole was famously hanged in 1741 for the foul and desperate murder of her husband Robert right there in Carter Court near the chemist shop.
And this detail is verifiable. The Old Bailey records, notable British trials, they confirm Jane O'Toole's hanging was notorious. John knows that 15,000 people gathered to see her executed.
And that she died hard, spinning for 4 minutes on the gallows.
Exactly. Her daughter, Rachel, returned to the family home and driven mad by her mother's fate, she decided to use this forbidden knowledge to extend her own life.
And Professor Wade theorized that it was Rachel's own daughter, Rosamond, who locked her in and bricked her up.
Right. And the discovery of small bones in the chamber, which they conclude were from an infant Rachel had consumed from the past, only cemented the idea that both of them, Fundanus and O'Toole, died in this failed attempt to gain longevity.
So the argument is that this terrifying history lesson explains the entire physical manifestation under their house. The ritual chamber, the corridor, the remains.
But the ritual, by creating a path through time, inadvertently opened a temporary chaotic door that linked 1963 back to 1863, leading John directly into the life of the Whitmarsh family.
And that transition takes us directly to the villains of the piece, the Whitmarsh family, who owned the apothecary in 1863. John describes them with this staggering, almost artistic vitriol.
Which lends itself perfectly to the idea that he's projecting his own darkest fears onto this historical family.
Right.
The family unit was deeply dysfunctional. You have Julius Whitmarsh, the weak-willed, timid, bald husband. Then Constance, the dominant wife, suffering from debilitating nerve storm migraines, treated with this vile cocktail of opium, vinegar, and marijuana. And their son, Silas.
And John meticulously researches the genealogy, noting that Silas, the central villain, was the result of the first-cousin marriage.
He paints Silas as an utterly vile creature. Bow-legged from rickets, toothless by age 12, possibly schizophrenic or psychopathic. If this is a fabrication, John is creating a monster and providing the precise medical and genetic justification for his evil.
And Silas's activities are monstrous. John claims he ran a horrific child trafficking ring.
He would supply young vagrant girls from around Covent Garden for auction in João Pessoa, Brazil, selling them for about £30 each, which was a significant sum in 1863.
And he sedated them with laudanum-laced milk. This is exactly the kind of obscure criminal financial detail that lends weight to the truth argument.
The logistics of where he kept them are crucial. The children were kept upstairs, roped to pegs, in a room that John later realized was the precise physical location of his own 1963 bedroom.
That overlap of realities must have been terrifying.
And the disposal methods were just as vile. If the children died from malnourishment or dehydration or being beaten to death, Silas would bury them in shallow graves in the adjacent Blackfriars Priory graveyard.
And he needed the help of Mrs. May, a terrified widow whose back window provided the only illegal access to the graveyard. Silas kept her compliant by threatening to cut her throat.
We also meet two other victims who become critical witnesses. Idabel, a 14-year-old Swedish orphan maid who knew everything about the devilish goings-on.
And Alice, Silas's 23-year-old living girlfriend who was recovering from a septic broken arm because Silas had violently kicked her. She was basically locked in his room.
And then there's the corruption that enabled it all. P.C. Harrison, the local beat policeman who was fully bribed by Silas and Constance.
And John later confirms that Harrison was convicted and hanged for his complicity in what became known as the Whitmarsh event. He even reports that Harrison died hard on the gallows, spinning for 4 minutes.
Again, the specificity is overwhelming. Why invent the 4 minutes of spinning? It's too granular, too gruesome, unless John had either witnessed this or intensely researched the outcome of these people.
The culmination of all this evil collided with the present in August 1963, when John and Jane's excited voices coming from behind that false wall in their cellar were overheard by Silas in 1863.
Silas was in the cellar at that exact moment, retrieving gold coins he had buried there. The ritual tunnel was only supposed to link to ancient times, but the kids' excavation ripped open this temporary gateway directly into the horrifying life of the Whitmarsh family.
So Silas hears the voices, chisels his way through, and travels through the tunnel into John's 1963 shop. John describes him as a crazed wild man, dressed most queerly.
He immediately hits John's father, grabs a butter knife, and drags Jane back through the tunnel to 1863.
And John notes the immediate, overwhelming stench of Silas, a combination of vomit and decay. This physical signature is what convinces John that Silas was really physically present in the 20th century.
Jane's awakening in 1863 is described with equal precision. She wakes up in a dark room, roped to a peg. She realizes it's her future bedroom, but in the past.
But she's a chemist's daughter, and she uses her small and partly trained little chemist nose to realize the water pitcher contains a cocktail of morphine and codeine.
And then, the true horror. She watches Silas murder one of the other girls who spat in his face, kills her with a single punch that broke her neck.
The sheer casual brutality, it solidifies Silas as this creature of pure evil, and it makes Jane a traumatized witness before John even gets there. John's story now moves into the rescue phase. This is where he has to transform from just an observer into an agent, and where his intelligence really shines, or where his psychopathic discipline becomes most apparent.
He immediately follows Silas to 1863. He enters the musty, foul-smelling cellar, goes into the Whitmarsh house, and finds himself in Ida Bell's room.
And this is where he encounters the time paradox directly, a moment that should shatter his belief system.
But he handles it with this clinical detachment. He sees his 1963 bedroom layout, the specific wallpaper, the exact placement of his radio superimposed with 1863 furniture, like Ida Bell's cot.
He sees the dormer window, but without the big BBC antenna his father hated. It's his home and not his home all at once.
And he just accepts this spatial contradiction as proof of time travel, not as a delusion. He's immediately captured and interrogated by Constance and Julius.
Constance, suffering a severe migraine, violently punches him, but she makes a mistake.
A huge mistake. She forcibly takes one of John's ibuprofen pills. And this is a key question. If the whole thing is a lie, why invent a moment where a 19th century woman experiences a 20th century drug?
The drug's miracle effect on her nerve storm migraine convinces her John has something valuable, and he uses this leverage instantly. He diagnoses Alice's septic arm and says he can get antibiotics if Silas returns Jane.
This is John the manipulator. He recognizes the weak link in the chain. Silas, despite being a monster, is protective of Alice and their child.
So John goes back to 1963, where his father has had time to process the assault and Jane's disappearance. And what does the father do? He dismisses the entire story as madness.
Which is just, it's unbelievable. You were physically attacked by a feral, stinking man who appeared from a hole in your floor and dragged your daughter through it. How do you dismiss that as madness?
I guess accepting time travel is just less palatable than believing your brilliant son is having a psychotic break.
Or maybe the father is just so consumed by his own desperation and fatigue that his mind just defaults to the easiest explanation.
Yeah.
John is mad.
So in desperation, John forces open his father's cabinet, steals the antibiotics and the rest of the ibuprofen, and goes back to 1863.
He tries a rescue on his own first, but it fails. Silas beats him severely. He finds Jane upstairs, now in a crazy condition. The room is filthy.
And then comes the ultimate threat from Constance. She says she'll have Julius, the dentist, extract Jane's lovely white teeth as compensation.
The monetization of Jane's teeth. That's the final, repulsive motivation he needs. He has to act, and he turns to the one authority figure he can trust in his own time, Inspector Knight.
The 1963 police officer who was investigating Jane's initial disappearance.
John takes the inspector into the cellar. He convinces him to enter the tunnel, shows him the centuries-old corpses, Fundanus and O'Toole, and the actual working 1863 world.
And the inspector, despite all his training, is forced to concede he's seeing a doorway to the past.
Let's just pause there for a second. This is the single most powerful external validation John gets. A professional, skeptical law enforcement officer is forced to accept that Roman priests, cannibalistic murderers, and Victorian child traffickers are all connected through a hole in a shop floor.
The psychological weight of that conversion is immense. It's a huge point for the truth argument.
So with the inspector on board, they get the chilling timetable from Ida Bell. The Whitmarsh family plans to extract Jane's teeth that very morning. But she reveals an even darker fate.
Professor Wade?
Professor Wade, the historian John took into the tunnel days earlier. She was dumped over the back in the graveyard after they finished with her.
And John provides the full, horrific details. She was strapped into the 19th century dental chair by Julius, given a narcotic by Silas, and had all her top and bottom teeth carefully extracted by Julius to be sold as stock.
A process that took until sunset. She was then dumped, swollen and bloody, in the graveyard.
But she was rescued by Mrs. May and her servant after they heard her groaning.
So the rescue plan moves fast. John, Inspector Knight, his father, who now has to accept the impossible, and the injured Professor Wade all re-enter 1863.
And John orchestrates this brilliant diversion. He uses smoke, created by burning stock and papers in the cellar, to simulate a massive fire.
It flushes the Whitmarsh family out into the 1863 street, right into the hands of the 1863 police and neighbors who already hated them. They rescue Jane, Alice clutching her baby, Jessamine, and Ida Bell.
But the victory is immediately annihilated. In the chaos of the arrests, as Silas is being taken away, he gets one final, devastating piece of revenge.
He lands a punch squarely on Jane's face. Jane loses consciousness and is rushed to St. Bartholomew's Hospital back in 1963.
And her permanent injury is the catastrophic result. A cerebral hemorrhage, significant trauma. She never recovered her higher functions, became mute, and remains John's permanent charge.
And critically, John's father lied to the hospital. He claimed she had fallen and struck her head, another calculated cover-up by the family.
The immediate aftermath is just marked by these disappearances, almost like reality was correcting itself. Professor Wade, after recovering and getting false teeth, returned to the cellar with a team to document the site.
But John later tries to find her at the British Museum in her flat, only to be told she never worked there. She was unknown. She just vanished completely.
Her existence was retroactively erased.
Or just can't be verified. Alice, the girlfriend, disappeared after 10 days in John's care. Slipped away in the night.
Idabel and the baby, Jessamine, stayed for several years. Idabel improved, but in 1967, she decided she had to go home to Sweden no matter what century it was.
Leaving John alone with Jane. The family unit collapses when his father dies 4 years later. John quits college to care for Jane full-time, eventually renting out the shop in 1991. The shop, the catastrophe, and the devotion to Jane become his entire constricted reality.
And here's where the rug is just violently pulled out from under John's narrative. We shift entirely to the cold, hard reality of 2006 and Martine Patterson's investigation, which utterly dismantles the physical evidence supporting his story.
Martine Patterson, working years later, she visits the Carter Lane address in 2006. She speaks to the current pharmacists, Alan and Hazel, who've been running the shop since 1991.
And Hazel confirms some of the basic, mundane facts. John sold them the building in 1991. She even confirms the existence of a small foreign woman and her child who lived there.
Which she found quite perplexing. But it does lend credence to the presence of Idabel and Jessamine.
But then, the foundation of John's entire terrifying story just crumbles. There are 3 devastating contradictions. Let's start with the one that undermines his whole premise of heroic devotion.
Crucial contradiction number 1. Hazel confirms John was a quiet man, but she also reports hearing terrible and prolonged bouts of shouting coming from upstairs.
So frequently that social service is often called the house.
This detail just violently contradicts John's carefully constructed narrative of infinite patience, the breathing bond, the unwavering sacrifice. It paints a picture of intense conflict, frustration, and maybe that intellectual sadism Martine suggested.
Right. A man whose whole identity is built on caring for his twin, but whose reality involves constant frustrated conflict with her.
Then, crucial contradiction number 2. Hazel states that she and Alan never had a cellar here, and that John's father never had one filled in.
Wait, no cellar at all?
No cellar. The absolute centerpiece of John's time travel story. The cellar, the tunnel, the ritual chamber, the entry point for Silas. It does not physically exist in 2007.
That's a massive structural physical contradiction. It means the entire stage for the impossible was non-existent.
And crucial contradiction number 3. Hazel flatly denies the existence of the preserved 19th century dental surgery, the museum. She just says, nothing like that here.
So the room that John claims provided his income and was a perfect suspension of time was either a complete fabrication or it vanished along with the cellar.
So his commitment to Jane is contradicted by neighbors. His income source and the physical location of his story's genesis are contradicted by the current owners. This forces us into the final synthesis.
The incredible historical detail John provides versus the total lack of physical evidence for the reality he describes.
The truth argument rests entirely on that level of specific, verifiable historical detail. Detail a 13-year-old boy in 1963 should not have possessed.
I mean, the depth of it, the incestuous Whitmarsh genealogy, the specific criminal dynamics of Ludgate Hill, the use of the barber's pole, the notorious details of P.C. Harrison's execution, the 4 minutes of spinning.
And the deep occult context of the Gonith ritual and its failed practitioners.
If this story is a fabrication, John Mills possessed an encyclopedic, almost pathological interest in the vile, criminal, and obscure history of his own street, and he was able to synthesize it all into this cohesive narrative.
And his intellectual sadism wasn't directed at Jane, perhaps, but at the reader, forcing them to confront a fictional reality built on staggering research.
Okay, so let's solidify the psychopath argument.
It rests on the hard evidence from Martine Patterson. The complete lack of physical evidence, no cellar, no dental surgery, the vanishing of Professor Wade, combined with John's documented mental health issues and the reports of terrible shouting at Jane.
This theory suggests the entire genius-level fabrication was created to cover up the real cause of Jane's brain damage. John says Jane's injury came from the final punch Silas landed in 1863.
But if John was abusive, as he even admits to being when he was younger, I used to treat my sister, punching and kicking her. And if Jane's permanent life-altering injury was caused by John himself, maybe in a fit of rage, then the time travel story is the perfect defense.
He blames a long-dead, monstrous 19th century psychopath for the crime. He frames the violent act a single punch onto the most vile creature imaginable, and then uses his intellectual brilliance to validate that scapegoat's existence through meticulous historical detail.
It forces you to question whether the entire description of the Whitmarsh family Silas as utterly vile, toothless, the product of incest, is John projecting his own self-loathing and violence onto a convenient historical scapegoat he created.
The discipline needed to maintain and write that defense for 20 years is truly terrifying.
And what about Inspector Knight? If John is fabricating, it means he was so persuasive, so utterly convinced of his own reality, that he convinced a 1963 police officer to believe in time travel, which shows the absolute power of John's mind.
The alternative is just as chilling. Inspector Knight did see the tunnel and the corpses, but was sworn to secrecy by higher authorities who feared the consequences of revealing a literal doorway to the past.
Which would place the cover-up not on John, but on the state.
We're left with this unbelievable complexity, a terrifying tale of ancient magic, Victorian child traffickers, and an impossible journey, all resting on the word of a man whose written devotion to his twin contrasts so sharply with the journalist's findings of conflict and a non-existent location.
The central conflict, as Martine Patterson defined it, remains. Did this boy travel through time, or was he a psychopathic lunatic with a genius for inventing stories to cover up his intellectual sadism? She never found a definitive answer, only unresolved absolute contradictions.
So if the physical foundation of the story, the cellar, the tunnel, didn't exist in 2006, suggesting the Whitmarsh world was a delusion, how did John manage to perfectly fabricate the identity and history of Professor Nisha Wade?
Right. She's the one person whose fate is explicitly proven to be unconnected to the 19th century. She was extracted from 1863, treated in 1963, returned to document the site, and then vanished.
It raises the final, unsettling thought for you to explore. If John fabricated the history to justify a crime and protect himself, why would he include the fact that the only witness he brought back, Professor Wade, the historian, the validator, disappeared just as completely as if she had traveled in time?
John had total control over his narrative. Was Professor Wade a fictional character he needed to explain the supernatural details? Or did John fabricate the proof of her disappearance, specifically to erase the one witness who could challenge the reality of the tunnel before she could expose his lie?